G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
David, thank you so much for making the time to speak with us. As I just mentioned before we hit the record button, personally, I'm really looking forward to this conversation and wish I'd come across you a bit earlier, given my adventures in buying businesses over the years. But why don't I throw it over to you to start with, to tell me a little bit about who you are and how you describe what you do.
Sure. So I'm a lifelong business enthusiast. And ever since I was a teenager, I knew that I wanted to be in business and be a business owner. And I went to business school at university thinking that that's where you learn how to be a business person. But it took me a few years to realize that what they really do there is they create what I now call Fortune 500 bureaucrats, right? People who work in these big companies. And my heart has always been in the businesses that you see when you're driving around your community. You know, the tire shop, the restaurant, the local businesses that we all patronize. And so eventually I left university, I finished there, and I got my first job, which was back in the 1990s as a Yellow Pages sales representative. And this is where I think my real business education happened because I spent all day, every day talking with the owners and managers of those businesses I just described. So I was going from one business to the next, talking about their advertising in the telephone directory, asking them what kind of customers they wanted, learning what their business model was, how they made money, what was an ideal client for them, et cetera. And so I really got to learn a lot about a lot of different businesses. But as we ticked closer and closer towards, the early 2000s and cell phones got smarter and Google got smarter, I realized, hey, this yellow page thing is probably going to have its sunset here sometime shortly. And so I had to do something else. And so the question was, do I go looking for another job or do I do the thing that I've always said I wanted to do? And I had always had a lot of little side hustle businesses when I was a teenager and things like this. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave this and I'm going to start a business. And I did so with a partner. And I ran that first business for about 18 months. And then we sold it actually to someone. And I started another business by myself where I got into finance brokerage. And so I was helping small business owners obtain financing for expansion, buying equipment, operating lines for credit, things like this to help them grow. I started to meet people who were looking for money to buy fully functional businesses. They wanted to acquire a business. And so that's kind of how I got introduced to the fact that there's such a profession as a business broker. And unfortunately, my introduction was pretty harsh. I got brought into a bunch of deals being orchestrated by people who really didn't know what they were doing. And I saw a lot of terrible things happen. I saw people make acquisitions without any real comprehension or accounting for operating capital and ended up in a bad spot as soon as they did the deal. I saw people get into deals using bad paperwork and the deals didn't work out, but they lost their deposits because they didn't know how to structure these things properly and they didn't know how to protect themselves. And so I saw these bad things happen. And then the financial crisis happened in 2008. And I realized, my broker pipeline kind of shriveled up because a lot of the lenders were having trouble at that time. And I thought, hey, here's an opportunity. I know that I don't know how to be a business broker, but I know I could probably do a better job than what I'm seeing. And so I got into the brokerage industry for business brokers. And I joined up with a big international franchise brand because they gave me access to training. And then over the next 4.5 years or so, I worked under someone else and then I went out on my own and I sold 3 dozen businesses here in the region over the next couple of years. And it was exciting because every business was a new puzzle to solve. And every, sort of interaction between a buyer and seller created a series of problems to solve, or dragons to slay, as it were. But I was able to get these deals done. I was able to help prepare the business for sale. I was able to find the right buyer, help that buyer get the financing, and help the deal come together. So it was really satisfying, but it was a crazy roller coaster cash flow. And I had 2 young children at the time, and I just realized I couldn't even make a household budget because one month I could have, $50 or $80,000 coming through the door. And then for 4 months there'd be nothing. Right. And it was just this commission driven industry. So it's up and
Yeah.
down and up and down. So I left and I became a banker. And I was a banker for a few years. And while I was doing that, my phone kept ringing from people who had been given my name who were trying to do these small business deals, whether buying or selling. And the bank restructured and there were packages being offered. And I thought, you know what? I can help these people. Like I started to build this little side hustle consulting thing. And I realized when the bank offered the package, I could take this money, I could use it as the runway to build a new business. And so I decided to start helping people buy and sell businesses again, but in a very different way. So what I've done is I've borrowed the business model of attorneys and accountants, and so I've structured business acquisition or sale into a series of steps, and I've packaged them. So if you want to think of productizing a service, there's 4 steps that I take people through. Each one has a fee attached to it, and I help people with whichever steps they want, and I charge them for what I do, just like a lawyer would do. And I don't charge commissions or have any kind of contingency back end revenue. So it smoothed out my cash flow is number one, what it did for me. But what it did for my clients is that it also greatly reduced the amount of money that they were paying for advisory services. Because in the world of business brokerage, most brokers are charging 10 or 12% of the value of the business. And the reason they charge so much is because they work on so many deals that never go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so they don't get paid on those deals. They've got to eat somehow. And so what I've often said to many people is if you build a successful business that a lot of people want to buy, then you get to subsidize the efforts of business brokers in their efforts to try to sell the crappy businesses that nobody wants.
Mm.
And
I haven't heard
nobody
it put
wants
that way before, but it's exactly right, isn't it? Yeah. Wow.
it is. And nobody likes that, right?
Mm.
So that was 9 years ago that I went through that transformation. And so, the way I promote my services is by being on YouTube and creating a podcast. And I've written a series of books. A new one just came out. And so this is what I'm doing is I get approached by people that find a business they might want to buy. They want help to analyze it. We do that. People who are introduced to this concept of buying a business that want to learn how to do it. I've got some training for that. And I've also got a group coaching program for people that want to buy a business if they want to be amongst others that are on the same journey and learn from each other, share notes, get to see what happens, hear the stories of the broker conversations, the banker conversations. And of course, this is the stuff that is not out publicly. It's very different to listen to a podcast where somebody explains over the course of an hour how they, decided to buy a business, found a business, negotiated, got the financing, and bought the business. But when you're in a group with people and you hear somebody talking to the same seller, the same broker on and off again over the span of a year, and then finally a deal comes together, you realize just what kind of journey these deals can sometimes be. Because the only true leverage that a buyer has in these negotiations is a willingness to not do a deal,
Mm.
right? The only thing you can do if the seller isn't going to give you a deal that works for you is just to back off. And sometimes that's what people have to do. They have to retreat and let that seller who thinks their business is worth more or thinks they can get better terms or what have you, let them go look for the person they think is out there. Because quite often that person is not. And after a couple of months, then you re-engage with them. And eventually they realize, what the market is telling them is that, they should probably do the deal with the person who keeps coming back to dance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really insightful. So how would you describe the typical client that you work with? I'm assuming it's a little bit different from both a buyer and seller perspective, but
Yeah. Well, I've got, they always tell you to create a customer avatar, right? And I have 3. So one is the seller, who's, you know, maybe we'll leave that one to the side, but let's talk about the buyer because there's 2 of them. So the 2 buyers that I typically work with are the middle-aged, mid-career person who knows that they can achieve more and wants to do more and has ambitions to do more, but for whatever reason is thwarted in their career wherever they happen to be professionally. And so they realize, if I'm going to move up, if I'm going to level up, I'm going to have to go out and do something on my own.
Yeah.
And
That
so
sounds
that would
familiar.
be, that sounds like you. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a big one, right?
Yeah.
The second one would be the newcomer who's just moved to a Western country. And
Okay.
so they may be a professional in their homeland, but probably their professional credentials may not be recognized in their new country. And they've got to earn an income, but they're not going to be able to do what they did in their homeland.
Yep.
And so, but they're very smart and they're educated.
Yep.
And the challenge for these people is often to find a business they can operate where they can leverage that knowledge or skill
Yeah.
set that they actually do have, right? So
Yeah.
this is where, someone who maybe is an engineer in one country moves to a new country where they're not recognized as an engineer, but they get involved in construction. So they certainly take advantage of what they know and
Yeah.
their experience,
Yeah.
but in a different way,
Yeah.
right?
Makes lots of sense. Yeah. Again, just talking about the buyers for a minute, I was just curious to know, in your opinion, is buying a business for everyone? Do you ever come across people and you're like, look, this really is not the right fit for you?
I think that buying a business is for a tiny minority of people. And if you're watching someone on the internet telling you that anyone can buy a business and anyone can operate a business, then you're probably looking at someone trying to sell you something.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look around, the vast majority of people, their best opportunity to earn money is to sell their time to someone, right? And this is why most people are employees. And it's when somebody feels a little bit of ambition and they're like, I should do more, I can be more, I want more. Those people kind of set themselves apart. What's interesting about the first customer avatar that I talked with you about is that a lot of the times these people are in fact not actually motivated by money. It's actually rare for me to meet someone who has a lot of business experience who says, I want to buy a business because I want to earn more. It's usually they want better control over their life, more freedom, more responsibility.
Yeah.
They have a very different lifestyle ambition of what they vision their future to be than what they're living. I talk to a lot of, corporate warriors that work 60 hours a week and they want to get out of that and they want to have a better life.
Yeah.
The people that I talk to who look at business acquisition as a means to get rich typically have no small business experience.
Interesting.
Okay. Which I find fascinating because what I think it is I think they get exposed to these online influencers and they get this idea that, there's all kinds of studies out there that show that people that own their own business are wealthier. And so then they figure, well, this is what I have to do. And when I ask them, what's your passion? What drives you? Why are you interested in business? Like, they really can't answer those questions because they don't have any of those things. They just want money and they think that owning a business is going to give them money. And I don't, most of them are not really prepared for what's in store because yes, you can earn more money as a business owner, but as you know, Rob, the buck stops at Rob. Like, all the responsibility lands on the business owner's shoulders. And it's interesting because having been on YouTube now for almost 10 years, I meet a lot of people who have followed this pathway. They've got sucked into the hype. They've done deals. They run smack into reality, realize after a little while that what they've done has been a huge mistake, that they're not making any money, that the way it was supposed to be didn't end up happening. And now they're panicky and they want to get out. And so I don't think it's for everybody. I I think that you need to be an entrepreneur. And I also think that buying a business, as I mentioned before, is a leveling up move. It's not a making money move. If you're broke, you need a job. If you want to buy a business, you need resources, not just to buy the business. You need money for all kinds of other things. And you need to always have, dry powder in case something happens because nothing solves problems like cash. And one of the biggest dangers I see people getting into is they overextend themselves. They'll put their very last nickel into a deal, and then you ask them questions like, well, what happens if revenue drops 10% next year? And they're like, well, I don't know. And then you show them on the financial statement of the business. You're like, well, if revenue drops 10%, you're going to save a little on your direct costs. All these overheads don't change. Guess what? That's, a 10% drop in revenue could be a 40% drop in net income. Guess what? Now you're not paying yourself a salary. Like, like, and I don't know about you, but I've seen so many sets of financial statements from small businesses where 5-10% annual oscillations is basically flat. Like, this is the normal jiggling results of some businesses based on the industry that they're in.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you are buying a business from a place of security, that you are a strong buyer, that any kind of upset or problem is not going to, send you into bankruptcy or something.
Are one or more of these growth pillars standing in the way of you living the lifestyle you've signed up for? People, strategy, marketing, funding, or systems? We have a free ebook filled with actions and templates on each of these growth pillars. Download for free from our website, growasmallbusiness.com.
So tell me, is there a typical process that you work through with your clients? And I guess because we're talking about the buy side, maybe if we explore that first.
Sure. So, for example, if somebody, I've got several books and an online training program, and people will go through that. And let's say they want to get into the group coaching program. One of the things that people will often say is, I don't really know what kind of business to look for. So I've got a process that I've created for helping people determine sort of a set of criteria or an industry target list.
Great.
And so what it involves is analyzing the characteristics of a business that you like. So, some people will say, well, I've got experience in machine shops, I should buy a machine shop. Let's think about machine shops. What do they do? Well, a machine shop is relatively capital intensive. You got a lot of equipment and machinery, right? You're typically doing business with other businesses. So you got fewer clients who may represent a larger ticket, a number of tickets each with larger dollar values. And you're typically going to be offering them terms. So you're going to have accounts receivable, right? So these are all business characteristics that I'm listing out here. So some people might say, well, I'm interested in a business with a lot of expensive gear. I like the idea of owning expensive stuff. Someone else might say, I don't want that at all. I'm more interested in a service business or maybe something like software where it's all just intellectual property, right? Someone might be interested in a business that has a lot of inventory. Some people might be frightened of inventory, right? What if it goes bad? What if it goes stale? What if it goes out of fashion? What if somebody steals it, right? And so as you work through these different criteria of what you might like, you create this list, a list of business characteristics that I think are good for me. Now that you have that list of characteristics, you can then go to some kind of list of industries. So of course, my favorite is always to reference the yellow pages, right? Because I used to sell yellow pages. So I'll say if you grab a yellow pages, if you can find, especially if you can find a 20-year-old one that has lots of ads in it, you look at the headings and you start at A, and the accountants will be there, and you can say, would an accounting practice satisfy some of my criteria, right? And then the next page might be, beekeeping supplies distributorship. Well, would this business satisfy some of my criteria? And by going through this exercise, people are often introduced to industries or business types that they've never really ever thought of before, but they might hold several of these characteristics that they find favorable out of their own sense of what they're looking for in a business. And so once you've created this list, then you can do a little bit more research. What can I learn about this industry? How many people are in this industry? Are there companies around here doing this? There's a lot of industries out there that nobody's ever heard of until they need something specifically. If you go winding through big industrial parks in big cities, you'll be amazed at the companies you find, and you'll be like, wow, I didn't realize somebody did that, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Like there's a company with 20 service vans and all they do is refill fire extinguishers, right? And like you walk past a fire extinguisher every day, you don't realize every 6 months someone comes and checks on that thing, or whatever the statute is, right? And
Yeah.
furthermore, the government tells them they have to.
Yeah.
So it's like the customers have no choice. So you can find these industries, and then you can make a decision about how you want to go sourcing deals. You can either go looking for what business brokers have for sale, or you can decide to do your own search, and you can network within certain industries and talk with people and try to find an opportunity on your own.
Yeah, it's amazing how many businesses are for sale when the question actually gets asked. A lot of business owners out there that are, you know, quite ready to put their business on the market if somebody does come knocking with some serious intent.
Selling a business is a hard thing. And there's a lot of talk on the internet about this silver tsunami, these baby boomers who are
Yeah.
retiring and all their businesses are being put up for sale. And there are some issues with that. Number one, back when I was a business broker, which is over a decade ago now, um, for every good business I listed for sale, I got 10 to 30 inquiries. There has never been a shortage of buyers for good businesses. Okay. So if somebody's on the internet saying that there's not enough buyers, that's not true. The thing is that a lot of the businesses that these baby boomers own are not worth owning. So there's a lot of very marginal lifestyle businesses out there that are really not much more than owning a job. And there is a market for jobs. I don't want to discourage people that have a business that is not much more than a job, because somebody will buy that if they're also looking for a self-directed income, right? The issue is they just won't pay much for it, right? Like if you are a plumber with one van and a bunch of tools and you're earning the equivalent of what a plumber at a big outfit would earn, is there a plumber that might like to step into your shoes? Probably, but they're not going to pay more than just buying your van and tools, right? Because the profit you earn is just what they would expect as a wage. And so to really make a business valuable, you as a business owner have to pay yourself a fair market wage. And most business owners are really ill-informed as to what that is. So take a look at some websites where salaries are disclosed and find out what people are really being paid by big companies to do the kind of role that you do in your own business. You want to pay yourself that fair market wage and then have profits beyond that, because it's those profits beyond that that really are what the business buyer wants to acquire, right? They want to have a rate of return as an investor, in addition to having an income for doing the work of being the manager. If they're going to step in and become the day-to-day manager as well, which most business sellers are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. David, I'm conscious of time. And I know we've got through step one of your process around what sort of business is right for me, but can I get you to step through the next few steps that you work through with buyers?
Well, actually, once you know what you're looking for, then it's just coaching people along their search.
Okay.
And and as they're meeting people and talking with the brokers and the owners and stuff, then we talk and we figure out what makes a reasonable offer and things like that. My business does consulting for people that have found a business that they might want to buy. We'll do an analysis and kind of show what it's worth, and compare it with other similar businesses that have sold. We've got access to private databases of past transactions that we use.
Great.
We have to go through a process called normalization to sort of undo some of the tax efficiencies that business owners employ sometimes.
Yeah.
And so we work through that process with people as well.
Great. No, that's fantastic. One of the services that Grow a Small Business offers is financial modeling. We work with business owners that we work with to develop a financial model for, it might be 5 or 10 years projection, and what are some of the key drivers that will influence the financial results in this business. And as part of that, we also look at, what does this mean from a valuation perspective? And it's really interesting working through that with business owners to help them get an understanding. First of all, what are some of those really key drivers of business value? And secondly, that concept of sort of, I think you described it as like the surplus profit over and above just taking a wage. If you want to, if you genuinely want a business that's not just tied to your hours, you're really trying to drive that surplus, which is hopefully generated not by the time that you're putting in, but by the people and systems that you're putting in around you to help make this business thrive. So,
I find the most interesting things, like particularly when I'm talking with someone who might want to sell a business, when we do an analysis of those businesses to kind of show people what their business is worth, we will go through a benchmarking exercise where we'll show them the different performance levels that are happening in their own industry amongst their peers. And we can get this from aggregate tax return data.
yeah,
So we can show them, for example, like people in your industry have a cost of goods sold average of 30% and yours is 36, which means either you're paying too much for stuff or your prices are high enough.
mm,
Which is it? And what's amazing is that most of the time these business owners had no idea that they were so far off the industry average. And a lot of it is just sort of this momentum that they get, and if they're making enough money that their bills are being covered and they're taking that wage and they're not trying to put their foot on the gas pedal to really accelerate and make the business as profitable as possible, they feel comfortable. And they're not thinking about what you just mentioned. They're not thinking about, hey, how do I make this into a real asset?
mm,
When they have trouble paying the bills, that's when they stop and they go, oh, maybe I should look at a price increase. But in the example I just gave, that was a person who had not done a price increase in 5 years. And I asked them, like, big companies, how often do they raise prices? Probably at least once a year,
mm,
right? Just to keep up with inflation.
yeah,
And when you let it slide for too long, well, then it can be difficult, right? Because then you're having serious conversations with your clients about why you have to make such a big jump, and it can
yeah,
be hard.
yeah. Yeah, 5% price increase isn't quite so difficult, but a 20% price increase, once every 3 or 4 years is a difficult conversation to have. So,
Yeah.
no, very good point. David, I might have to wind it up there just given time, but if you had to say there's one thing that a business owner should take away from this conversation and think about as they're running their business, what would you say that would be?
As they're running their business, I think the one big takeaway that people should have is just that running a business successfully is hard. People already know that. People listening already know that if they're already running a business. Selling a business is hard as well. It's incredibly difficult.
Mm,
In fact, the way I often describe it is I will say, if you get an offer on your business, it can be like winning the lottery. But then to actually complete the deal, it's like winning the lottery again,
mm,
because it's really hard to get a buyer to make an offer on your business, especially if you're not properly prepared. So, what do I mean by that? If your business is a great business, if you've been working with Rob and you've got your profitability in line, you've got a great cash flowing business, and people might want to own your business, but you go out into the market and you ask double what it's worth, all of the buyers who are knowledgeable, informed, have money, good credit, and experience in your industry, they're going to take one look at your offering and they're going to say, wow, that guy's, a little off his rocker. I'm not going to waste my time talking to that guy.
yeah.
But the people you will meet are other people who also don't know what they're doing. And so those people will engage with you for months on end. They'll make you even a full price offer. Then they'll go off and have the banker tell them why it doesn't work.
Mm,
And the whole thing will end up being a waste of effort. So you've got to come to market with a sensible valuation. You have to have a realistic understanding of what the deal is going to look like. So, selling a business is not like selling a house or selling a car. In almost every instance, the seller is part of the financing solution for the buyer. So sellers need to understand that a reasonable offer for their business might not be paid fully on closing day. So there could be some money from the buyer There could be some financing from a bank if there's financeable assets in the business, and you might be asked to finance part of that deal. I have worked with people before who have come to me and said, Dave, I've been working with a business broker for the last 2 years, and my business hasn't sold. Can you help me? And I'll take a look at the offering memorandum that the business broker put together, and I'll come back to them and say, look, here are the numbers. Here's what other businesses like yours have sold for. You're asking way too much money.
Yeah.
My advice to a buyer would be, this would be a reasonable offer, this amount down, expect this amount of bank financing, this amount of seller financing. That's what you should be looking for.
Good advice.
And I've had more than one seller say to me, oh my God, someone made me that offer over a year ago.
We'd greatly appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to leave our podcast a review on iTunes. If you don't have an account, simply follow us on Spotify. You'll help other small business owners find the cast and valuable content our guests share.